The sun was setting over Riverside Heights, painting the sky in soft orange and pink colors. This neighborhood was known for its big houses, perfectly cut lawns, and expensive cars parked in long driveways. It was the kind of place where people paid extra just to live there, and everyone knew it. Officer Tommy Rodriguez had been patrolling these streets for 3 years now. He knew every corner, every house, and most importantly, he knew who belonged here and who didn't. At least that's what he thought he knew. As he drove slowly down Maple Avenue, something caught his eye. A woman was walking along the sidewalk, and something about her just didn't sit right with him. She was black, probably in her 40s, wearing a nice navy blue dress and carrying a small purse. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and she walked with confidence, like she had every right to be there. But in Tommy's mind, she didn't belong. Not in this neighborhood. Not at this time of evening. He pulled his patrol car over to the curb and got out. The woman noticed him immediately, but kept walking at the same steady pace. She didn't look nervous or scared, which somehow made Tommy even more suspicious. "Excuse me, ma'am," he called out, his voice already carrying an edge of authority. "Can I have a word with you?" The woman stopped and turned to face him. Up close, Tommy could see she was well-dressed, professional-looking. Her makeup was perfect. Her jewelry looked expensive, and there wasn't a single thing out of place about her appearance. But none of that mattered to Tommy. All he saw was someone who, in his opinion, didn't belong in his territory. "Good evening, officer," she said politely. Her voice was calm and educated. "Is there something I can help you with?" "I need to see some identification," Tommy said, stepping closer to her. "We've had some reports of suspicious activity in this area." This was a lie, and they both knew it. There had been no reports. It was just past 7 in the evening, and the woman was simply walking down a public sidewalk. But Tommy was used to making up reasons when he needed them. The woman reached into her purse slowly, making sure her movements were visible. She pulled out her driver's license and handed it to him. "Here you go," she said. Tommy looked at the license, Dr. Angela Williams. The address showed she lived across town, in a much less expensive area. This only confirmed what he already believed. She was an outsider. Someone who had no business being here. "What are you doing in this neighborhood, Dr. Williams?" he asked, emphasizing the title in a mocking way. "This is a private residential area." Angela kept her composure. "I was visiting a friend who lives on this street. I'm walking to my car, which is parked just around the corner." "What friend?" Tommy demanded. "What's their address?" "I don't think that's necessary information for a routine stop," Angela replied calmly. "I haven't done anything wrong." This response irritated Tommy. He was used to people being intimidated by his uniform, his badge, his authority. He expected them to stammer, to apologize, to explain themselves in great detail. Angela's calm confidence made him feel like she was challenging him, and he didn't like it one bit. "Look, lady," he said, his tone getting more aggressive. "I ask the questions here. You just answer them. Now, what were you really doing here? And don't give me some story about visiting friends." Angela could feel the situation escalating. She had dealt with difficult people before, but this was different. This officer seemed determined to find fault with her presence no matter what she said. She decided to try a different approach. "Officer, I understand you're doing your job," she said, keeping her voice steady. "But I really haven't done anything wrong. I visited my colleague at 1247 Maple Avenue, and now I'm walking to my car." "That's all?" Tommy's eyes narrowed. "Your colleague? What kind of colleague lives in a neighborhood like this?" The question stung because of what it implied. Angela had worked her entire life to get where she was, earning respect through hard work, education, and dedication. But to this officer, it seemed impossible that she could have legitimate reasons to be in an upscale neighborhood. "I work in law enforcement," she said simply, hoping this might change his attitude, but it had the opposite effect. Tommy let out a short, harsh laugh. "Law enforcement? What, like a security guard or something?" Angela felt a flash of anger but kept it under control. "Something like that," she said quietly. Without warning, Tommy grabbed her purse from her hands. "Let's see what you're really carrying in here," he said. "Excuse me," Angela said, her voice rising slightly. "You have no right to search my belongings without probable cause." "I have every right to ensure the safety of this neighborhood," Tommy shot back. He started going through her purse, pulling out her wallet, her keys, her phone. That's when Angela made a decision that would change everything. She pulled out her own phone and started recording. I'm going to document this interaction, she said calmly. Tommy's face turned red with anger. Turn that thing off right now, he ordered. I have the right to record police interactions in public, Angela said, continuing to film. You have the right to do what I tell you to do, Tommy snarled. He was losing control now, his professionalism completely gone. The fact that she was recording him made everything worse. In his mind, she was being disrespectful, challenging his authority, making him look bad. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me, he said, reaching for his handcuffs. You're under arrest for loitering and interfering with police business. Angela couldn't believe what she was hearing. Loitering? I'm walking on a public sidewalk to my car, and I'm not interfering with anything. You're arguing with a police officer and refusing to cooperate, Tommy said. His voice was getting louder, attracting attention from people in nearby houses. A few neighbors had come out onto their porches to see what was happening. That's when Tommy did something that shocked everyone watching, including himself. In a moment of pure rage and frustration, he bent down and spat on the ground near Angela's feet. That's what I think of people like you coming into neighborhoods where you don't belong, he said. The words hung in the air like poison. Angela stood there still holding her phone, recording everything. She had faced discrimination before, but never anything this blatant, this cruel, this unprofessional. The neighbors who were watching fell silent. Even they could see that what had just happened was wrong. This wasn't about law and order anymore. This was about something much uglier. Angela looked at Tommy with a mixture of sadness and determination. She had spent her entire career fighting against exactly this kind of behavior. She had dedicated her life to making sure that law enforcement served everyone fairly, regardless of their race or background, and now here she was, experiencing the very thing she had worked so hard to eliminate. Officer, she said quietly, her voice carrying a weight that made Tommy pause for the first time since the interaction began. I think you need to reconsider what you're doing here. But Tommy was too far gone to listen. The adrenaline was pumping through his veins, and he felt like he had gone too far to back down now. He had made his position clear, and in his twisted thinking, he had to follow through. The only thing I'm reconsidering, he said, pulling out his handcuffs, is whether to charge you with resisting arrest too. That's when Angela Williams decided it was time to end this charade once and for all. Angela looked at Officer Rodriguez as he fumbled with his handcuffs, his hands shaking slightly from anger and adrenaline. The neighbors on their porches were watching in stunned silence. Some were recording with their phones now, drawn by the commotion and the obvious wrongness of what they were witnessing. Officer Rodriguez, Angela said, reading his name tag clearly for the first time. Her voice was steady, but there was something different about it now. Something that made Tommy pause even though he didn't want to. I'm going to give you one more chance to think about what you're doing here tonight. Tommy stopped mid-motion, the handcuffs half open in his hands. Something in her tone had shifted. It wasn't pleading or scared like he expected. It was authoritative. It was the voice of someone who was used to being listened to, someone who was used to being in charge. Lady, I don't know what game you think you're playing, Tommy said, but his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. But you're about to find out that I don't play games. Angela took a deep breath. She had hoped it wouldn't come to this. She had wanted to handle the situation without pulling rank, without using her position. She believed strongly that every citizen, regardless of their job or status, should be treated with respect by law enforcement. But Tommy had pushed things too far. Officer Rodriguez, she said, her voice now carrying the full weight of her authority. I am Chief Angela Williams of the Metropolitan Police Department, and you are making the biggest mistake of your career. The words hit Tommy like a physical blow. He actually took a step backward, the handcuffs falling from his suddenly nerveless fingers and clattering onto the sidewalk. What? He whispered. You heard me correctly, Angela said calmly. I am your chief. I am the head of the department you work for, and you just spat at my feet. Tommy's face went through a series of emotions in rapid succession. First disbelief, then confusion, then a dawning horror as the reality of the situation began to sink in. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. That's impossible, he finally managed to say. You're lying. You're just trying to get out of trouble. Angela reached into her purse, moving slowly and deliberately. She pulled out a leather wallet and flipped it open, revealing her police badge and identification. The badge gleamed under the streetlights, and even from a distance, Tommy could see the word Chief engraved clearly on it. Metropolitan Police Department, Angela said, holding the badge up so he could see it clearly. Chief Angela Williams, badge number 01. Tommy stared at the badge, his brain struggling to process what he was seeing. He had seen Chief Williams before, of course, but only from a distance at department meetings and ceremonies. She was always in uniform then, always on a stage or behind a podium. He had never paid much attention to her face, never thought he would encounter her like this. But now, looking at her up close, seeing the badge, seeing the quiet authority in her eyes, he knew it was true. This was his boss. This was the person who ran the entire police department, and he had just treated her like a criminal. "Oh God," he whispered, and his legs actually gave out slightly. He had to lean against his patrol car to stay upright. The neighbors who were watching were beginning to understand what was happening too. Whispers started spreading from porch to porch. "That's the police chief." He didn't know who she was. "This is unbelievable." Angela put her badge away and looked at Tommy with a mixture of disappointment and sadness. "Officer Rodriguez, in my 25 years in law enforcement, I have never experienced anything quite like what just happened here tonight." Tommy tried to speak, tried to apologize, tried to explain, but the words got tangled up in his throat. He was having trouble breathing and his heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. "Chief, I didn't know. I mean, you weren't in uniform. You thought what exactly?" Angela asked. "You thought it was acceptable to treat any citizen the way you just treated me. You thought it was professional to spit at someone's feet because you didn't think they belonged in a particular neighborhood." Tommy's mind was racing, trying to figure out how to fix this, how to make it right, how to save his career. But deep down he knew there was no fixing this. "You don't spit at the police chief and walk away from it." "I was just doing my job," he said weakly. "I was protecting the neighborhood." "From what?" Angela asked. "From a well-dressed woman walking to her car after visiting a friend?" "What exactly were you protecting them from, Officer Rodriguez?" The question hung in the air, and Tommy realized he had no good answer. He had no answer at all, really. He had acted on instinct, on prejudice, on assumptions that he now realized were completely wrong. "Chief, please," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I made a mistake. I can fix this. It won't happen again." Angela looked at him for a long moment. Around them, the neighborhood had gone quiet except for the sound of distant traffic and the soft murmur of the watching neighbors. "Officer Rodriguez," she said finally, "do you have any idea how many complaints we receive about police misconduct every month?" Tommy shook his head. "Dozens," Angela continued. "And do you know what the most common complaint is? Officers who assume things about people based on their race, their appearance, their neighborhood. Officers who think they can decide who belongs somewhere and who doesn't." She paused, letting that sink in. "I became a police officer because I wanted to serve and protect all citizens equally, not just the ones who look like me, not just the ones who live in expensive neighborhoods, not just the ones who never question authority. All citizens." Tommy was crying now, though he was trying hard not to let it show. His whole career was over, and he knew it. Everything he had worked for, everything he had built, was crumbling around him because of 5 minutes of poor judgment. "Chief, what happens now?" he asked quietly. Angela looked at her phone, which was still recording. She had captured everything: his aggressive questioning, his illegal search of her purse, his discriminatory comments, and most damning of all, the moment when he spat at her feet. "Now," she said, "you're going to get back in your patrol car, and you're going to drive back to the station. You're going to park your car, turn in your weapon and badge, and wait for me in my office." Tommy nodded miserably. "Am I fired?" "Officer Rodriguez," Angela said, "you assaulted a citizen tonight. You violated their civil rights. You conducted an illegal search, and you did all of this while wearing the uniform that represents our entire department." She paused, looking at him with those steady professional eyes. "Whether you're fired is going to depend on a lot of things. It's going to depend on your record, on the investigation, on whether the district attorney decides to press charges. But what I can tell you right now is that your days of patrolling these streets are over." Tommy felt like he was going to throw up. The full weight of what he had done was finally hitting him. This wasn't just about losing his job. He could face criminal charges. His life as he knew it was over. "I didn't know," he said one more time, as if saying it again might somehow change things. Angela shook her head sadly. Officer Rodriguez, that's exactly the problem. You didn't know, but you acted anyway. You made assumptions, and you let those assumptions guide your behavior. And that's not just unprofessional. It's dangerous. She started walking toward her car, which was parked just around the corner as she had said all along. Chief, Tommy called after her. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Angela stopped and turned back to look at him one more time. Officer Rodriguez, I believe you are sorry. But you're not sorry because you did something wrong. You're sorry because you got caught doing something wrong to the wrong person. And that's a very different thing. With that, she walked away, leaving Tommy standing alone on the sidewalk next to his patrol car, his career and his future in ruins, finally beginning to understand the true weight of his actions. Chief Angela Williams sat in her office at 11:30 that night, still wearing the navy blue dress from her community meeting. The building was mostly empty except for the night shift officers and dispatchers, but word about what had happened was already spreading through the department like wildfire. Her phone had been ringing constantly since she got back to the station. The deputy chief, the mayor's office, the police union representative, local news stations who had somehow gotten wind of the story. She had ignored most of the calls, needing time to think through her next steps carefully. Officer Rodriguez had been sitting in the waiting area outside her office for over an hour. She could see him through the glass partition, slumped in his chair, his head in his hands. His patrol car was in the parking lot, and his weapon and badge were locked in her desk drawer. Angela had watched the video she recorded 3 times now. Each viewing made her feel a mixture of anger, sadness, and determination. This wasn't just about one bad officer anymore. This was about everything she had been trying to change since becoming chief 2 years ago. There was a soft knock on her door. Deputy Chief Robert Barnes entered, closing the door behind him. Bob had been her mentor when she first joined the force, and she trusted his judgment completely. How are you holding up? He asked, settling into the chair across from her desk. I've been better, Angela admitted. Have you watched the video? Bob nodded grimly. I watched it twice. Angela, this is bad. Really bad. But it could also be an opportunity. An opportunity? She asked. To make the changes we've been talking about. The training programs, the accountability measures, the community oversight. We've been saying we need a catalyst. Something that would force the department to take these issues seriously. Well, this might be it. Angela leaned back in her chair. She had been thinking the same thing. But it felt strange to talk about her own traumatic experience as an opportunity for change. What about Rodriguez? She asked. That's your call, Bob said. But whatever you decide, it needs to send a clear message to every officer in this department. Before Angela could respond, there was another knock. This time it was Detective Lisa Chen from Internal Affairs. Chief, I'm sorry to bother you so late, but we need to start the investigation process, Lisa said. The longer we wait, the more complicated this becomes. Angela nodded. What do you need from me? Your statement, the video, and any other evidence. And we need to interview Rodriguez tonight while everything is still fresh. Has anyone else come forward? Angela asked. Lisa looked uncomfortable. Actually, yes. As soon as word got out about what happened, we started getting calls. 3 other civilians have filed complaints about Rodriguez in the past 6 months. 2 of them are similar to what you experienced. Questioning people in upscale neighborhoods where he assumed they didn't belong. Angela wasn't surprised, but it still made her angry. Why weren't these complaints investigated properly? They were investigated, Lisa said carefully. But Rodriguez's supervisor said there wasn't enough evidence to take disciplinary action. The complaints were filed, noted in his record, but nothing more. This was exactly the kind of systemic problem Angela had been trying to address. Officers protecting each other, supervisors looking the other way, complaints disappearing into bureaucratic black holes. Who were his supervisors? She asked. Sergeant Mike Johnson and Lieutenant Paul Hayes. Angela knew both men. Old-school officers who had been with the department for over 20 years. They weren't bad people, but they represented the old way of doing things, the culture of protecting fellow officers no matter what. I want to see all of Rodriguez's files, she said. Every complaint, every performance review, everything. I'll have them on your desk first thing tomorrow, Lisa promised. After Lisa left, Angela and Bob sat in silence for a few minutes. Finally, Bob spoke up. You know the union is going to fight this hard, he said. They're going to say Rodriguez made an honest mistake, that he didn't know who you were, that he was just doing his job. And what am I supposed to say to that? Angela asked. That it's okay to treat regular citizens that way as long as they're not the police chief? Of course not. But you know how these things work. The union will make this about officer safety, about split-second decisions, about the dangers of second-guessing police work. Angela stood up and walked to her window, looking out at the parking lot where Rodriguez's patrol car sat under the fluorescent lights. Bob, what if this had been any other person tonight? What if it had been a teacher, or a nurse, or a store clerk walking through that neighborhood? Would they have gotten justice? Or would this have been another complaint that got filed away and forgotten? You know the answer to that, Bob said quietly. That's exactly why we can't let this slide. This isn't about me being the chief. This is about the fact that what Rodriguez did tonight was wrong. Period. It would have been wrong if he had done it to anyone. There was movement outside her office. Rodriguez had stood up from his chair and was pacing back and forth in the waiting area. Angela could see the stress and fear written all over his face. What do you think is going through his head right now? She asked Bob. Probably trying to figure out how to save his career, Bob replied. Maybe working on his story, thinking about what he can say to make this better. Angela shook her head. That's the problem right there. He's not thinking about what he did wrong. He's thinking about how to get out of trouble for doing it. Her desk phone rang. It was the overnight dispatch supervisor. Chief, we've got a situation developing. The video from tonight is starting to go viral on social media. The neighbors who were watching posted it online, and now the local news stations are picking it up. We're getting calls from reporters wanting statements. Angela hung up and looked at Bob. It's going to get worse before it gets better, isn't it? Probably, Bob admitted. But Angela, you handled this exactly right. You stayed professional, you documented everything, and you followed proper procedure. Whatever happens now, you did everything by the book. Angela wasn't worried about her own reputation. She was worried about the department, about the community's trust, about all the progress they had made in recent years. I need to talk to Rodriguez, she said finally. Are you sure that's a good idea? Maybe you should let Internal Affairs handle the interview. I'm sure. This isn't just about him anymore. It's about what kind of department we want to be. Bob nodded and left to get Rodriguez. A few minutes later, the officer entered her office, looking like he had aged 10 years in the past hour. Sit down. Officer Rodriguez, Angela said. Tommy sat heavily in the chair, unable to make eye contact with her. Chief, I don't even know where to start. I'm so sorry. I made a terrible mistake tonight. Tell me about the other complaints, Angela said directly. Tommy's head snapped up. What other complaints? The ones filed against you in the past 6 months. The ones about you questioning people in neighborhoods where you thought they didn't belong. Tommy's shoulders slumped. Those were different. Those people really were acting suspicious. How were they acting suspicious, Officer Rodriguez? Tommy was quiet for a long moment. They didn't fit in those neighborhoods. What does that mean exactly? They didn't fit in? Look, Chief, I know how this sounds, but when you patrol the same area for years, you get to know what's normal and what isn't. And when you see someone who doesn't belong— Stop right there, Angela interrupted. Who gets to decide who belongs in a public neighborhood? Who gave you that authority? Tommy realized he was digging himself deeper, but he couldn't seem to stop. It's not about authority, it's about experience. It's about knowing your beat. Officer Rodriguez, do you understand that what you're describing is racial profiling? The words hung in the air between them. Tommy wanted to deny it, wanted to explain that it wasn't about race, but deep down he knew she was right. It had always been about race, even when he told himself it wasn't. I never meant for it to be about race, he said quietly. But it was about race, wasn't it? Every time, every complaint, including tonight. Tommy finally looked up at her, tears in his eyes. Yes, he whispered. I guess it was. It was the first honest thing he had said all evening, and for Angela it was both heartbreaking and infuriating. Here was an officer admitting to years of discriminatory behavior, and the system had protected him until tonight. Officer Rodriguez, you're suspended without pay pending the outcome of the Internal Affairs investigation. You'll surrender your service weapon badge and any department property. You're not to have any contact with witnesses or other officers about this incident. Tommy nodded miserably. What happens next? Next, we figure out how to make sure this never happens again to anyone. 2 weeks had passed since the incident on Maple Avenue. and Chief Angela Williams found herself at the center of a storm that was growing larger by the day. What had started as one officer's misconduct had evolved into a citywide conversation about police reform, racial profiling, and accountability. The internal affairs investigation had uncovered more than anyone expected. Detective Lisa Chen sat across from Angela's desk with a thick folder of documents, her face showing the exhaustion of someone who had been working 18-hour days. "Chief, what we've found goes way beyond Officer Rodriguez," Lisa said, opening the folder. "We've identified a pattern that involves multiple officers, supervisors, and even some department policies that may have enabled this behavior." Angela leaned forward. "Show me what you've got." Lisa spread out several documents on the desk. Rodriguez had 6 complaints filed against him in the past 2 years. Not 3 like we initially thought. But here's the interesting part. 5 of those complaints were filed by people of color, and all of them involved stops in predominantly white, affluent neighborhoods. "What happened to those complaints?" Angela asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. They were all ruled unfounded or not sustained by his supervisors. Sergeant Johnson and Lieutenant Hayes consistently defended Rodriguez's actions, saying he was being proactive about neighborhood security. Angela reviewed the files. The pattern was clear and disturbing. A young black man questioned while jogging through Riverside Heights. A Latino family stopped and searched after visiting a friend in the Westmont district. An Asian woman detained for over an hour while trying to deliver food to a customer. What about the supervisors? Did they know this was happening? Lisa nodded grimly. "We interviewed both of them yesterday. Sergeant Johnson actually defended Rodriguez's actions, saying that certain neighborhoods require extra vigilance. Lieutenant Hayes was more careful with his words, but he admitted that he never seriously investigated any of the complaints. Because they didn't want to investigate them, or because they didn't think they were serious? Both, I think. There's a culture in some parts of our department that sees these kinds of complaints as people just trying to cause trouble for hardworking officers. They automatically assume the officer is right and the civilian is wrong." Angela had suspected this for years, but seeing it documented so clearly still shocked her. "Who else knew about this pattern?" "That's where it gets complicated," Lisa said. "The complaints were filed with the department, so they were in the system. But they were never flagged as part of a pattern because each supervisor handled them individually. No one was looking at the big picture. This was exactly the kind of systemic failure Angela had been trying to address since becoming chief. Officers weren't operating in isolation. They were part of a culture that either encouraged or discouraged certain behaviors. Angela's phone buzzed with a text message from her assistant. "Channel 7 News is here for your interview. They're setting up in conference room B." "I have to go talk to the media," Angela told Lisa. "But I want a complete report on your desk by tomorrow morning. I want to know every officer who has multiple complaints like this, every supervisor who dismissed legitimate concerns, and every policy that might have contributed to this problem." The interview with Channel 7 was Angela's 3rd media appearance since the incident. The story had gone national now, with cable news shows debating police reform and racial profiling. Angela had decided early on to be completely transparent about what happened and what the department was doing in response. Reporter Jennifer Walsh was professional but persistent. "Chief Williams, some people are saying that you're being too harsh on Officer Rodriguez, that this was an isolated incident by one officer who made a mistake. How do you respond to that?" "Jennifer, the investigation has shown that this was not an isolated incident. Officer Rodriguez had a pattern of behavior that targeted people of color in certain neighborhoods. More importantly, our department's complaint process failed to identify and address this pattern. This isn't just about one officer. It's about a system that allowed this behavior to continue. What specific changes is the department making?" Angela had been preparing for this question. "We're implementing several reforms immediately. First, all civilian complaints will now be reviewed by an independent oversight committee that includes community members. Second, we're requiring implicit bias training for all officers with annual recertification. Third, we're changing how we assign officers to patrol areas to ensure they better reflect the communities they serve. Critics say these changes are too little, too late, that the department has known about these problems for years and done nothing." Angela took a deep breath. This was the hardest part of being in her position. taking responsibility for problems that existed long before she became chief, while also trying to fix them. Those critics are right to be frustrated. Our department, like many others across the country, has not done enough to address racial bias in policing. I take full responsibility for that failure, but I also want the community to know that we are committed to real change, not just cosmetic reforms. After the interview, Angela returned to her office to find Deputy Chief Barnes waiting with more developments. The police union called a press conference, Bob said. They're claiming that Rodriguez is being scapegoated, that he was following department procedures and that you're throwing him under the bus to save your own reputation. Angela wasn't surprised. The union had been quiet for the first week after the incident, but she knew they would eventually push back. What did they say exactly? Union President Dave Miller said that Rodriguez was conducting a routine investigation of suspicious activity, that he had no way of knowing who you were, and that the department is overreacting because of political pressure. Political pressure? Angela asked. Miller claims that you're only pursuing this so aggressively because the incident was recorded and went viral. He says if there hadn't been video, this would have been handled quietly like every other complaint. The accusation stung because there was some truth to it. If Angela had been just another citizen, if the incident hadn't been recorded, if it hadn't gone viral, would Rodriguez have faced any consequences at all? Based on his track record, probably not. But that was exactly why the system needed to change. Schedule a department-wide meeting for tomorrow morning, Angela told Bob. I want every officer, every supervisor, every administrator to hear directly from me what's happening and why. Are you sure that's a good idea? Feelings are running pretty high right now. That's exactly why I need to do it. This department is divided and we can't move forward if people don't understand what we're trying to accomplish. That evening, Angela attended a community meeting in the fellowship hall of Mount Olive Baptist Church. The room was packed with residents who were both angry and hopeful, angry about what had happened, but hopeful that real change might finally come. Mrs. Dorothy Jefferson, a retired teacher who had lived in the community for 40 years, stood up during the question period. Chief Williams, I appreciate you being here tonight, and I appreciate you handling this situation the way you have. But I need to ask you something directly. If this had happened to me instead of you, would we be having this conversation right now? The room went quiet. It was the question everyone was thinking but hadn't wanted to ask. Angela looked around the room at all the faces watching her, young and old, hopeful and skeptical, trusting and suspicious. These were the people she had sworn to serve and protect. Mrs. Jefferson, I wish I could tell you yes, but honestly, I don't know. Based on what we've learned about how complaints were handled in the past, you might have been just another file in a drawer, and that's not acceptable. That's not the kind of department I want to lead, and it's not the kind of police force this community deserves. An older man in the back raised his hand. So what's different now? How do we know this isn't just talk? Because this time the whole city is watching, Angela replied. Because this time we have video evidence that no one can deny or dismiss. And because this time, I'm not going to let the system protect officers who violate the rights of the citizens they're supposed to serve. She paused, looking around the room again. But most importantly, because I've lived it now. I've experienced what it feels like to be on the other side of police misconduct. And I never want anyone else in this community to feel what I felt that night. The meeting ended with cautious optimism. People weren't ready to fully trust yet, but they were willing to give Angela a chance to prove that real change was possible. As she drove home that night, Angela reflected on how much her perspective had changed in just 2 weeks. She had always known intellectually that police misconduct was a problem, but experiencing it firsthand had given her a deeper understanding of why reform was so desperately needed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The department meeting, more media interviews, continued pressure from the union and the ongoing investigation. But for the first time since becoming chief, Angela felt like she had a real mandate for change. The incident with Rodriguez had been terrible, but it had also created an opportunity to address problems that had been festering in the department for years. Now the question was whether she could turn that opportunity into lasting reform. 6 months had passed since the incident on Maple Avenue, and Chief Angela Williams stood before the City Council to present her department's progress report on police reform. The council chamber was packed with community members, officers, and media representatives, all waiting to hear whether the promises made in the aftermath of the Rodriguez incident had become reality. 6 months ago, our department faced a crisis that forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about how we police our community, Angela began. Today I'm here to report on the concrete steps we've taken to ensure that what happened to me never happens to anyone else. In the front row sat Mrs. Dorothy Jefferson, the retired teacher who had asked the tough questions at the community meeting. Next to her was David Park, a young man who had been one of Rodriguez's previous victims and had become an advocate for police reform. The internal affairs investigation concluded last month, Angela continued. Officer Rodriguez was terminated from the police force and has been charged with civil rights violations and assault. But more importantly, our investigation revealed systemic problems that required systematic solutions. The numbers told the story clearly. The investigation had identified 12 officers with patterns of discriminatory behavior similar to Rodriguez's. 7 had been terminated or resigned under pressure. 3 had been suspended and were undergoing intensive retraining. 2 had been transferred to administrative positions where they had no contact with the public. We also discovered that our complaint process was fundamentally broken, Angela said. In the past 5 years, we received over 200 complaints alleging racial bias or discrimination. Only 12 resulted in any disciplinary action, and none resulted in termination. This statistic had shocked even Angela when she first saw it. It meant that officers could engage in discriminatory behavior repeatedly, with virtually no consequences. That ends today. We've established an independent citizen review board with subpoena power to investigate all complaints of police misconduct. The board includes community members, civil rights attorneys, and retired judges. They report directly to the mayor and city council, not to the police department. The new system had already shown results. In its first 4 months of operation, the Citizen Review Board had upheld more complaints and recommended more disciplinary actions than the department had taken in the previous 2 years. Angela clicked to the next slide in her presentation. We've also completely reformed our training program. Every officer in the department has completed 40 hours of implicit bias training, de-escalation techniques, and community policing workshops. These aren't one-time trainings. They're now required annually. The training program had been challenging to implement. Some veteran officers had resisted, claiming they didn't need to be taught how to do their jobs. But Angela had made it clear that participation wasn't optional. Officers who refused to complete the training were suspended without pay until they complied. Perhaps most importantly, we've changed how we assign officers to patrol areas. Instead of having the same officers patrol the same neighborhoods for years, we now rotate assignments regularly. This prevents officers from developing an inappropriate sense of ownership over particular areas. This change had been controversial within the department. Many officers preferred the familiarity of a regular beat, and some community members wanted to get to know their local officers. But Angela had realized that the old system had allowed officers like Rodriguez to develop problematic attitudes about who belonged in certain neighborhoods. We've also established a new early warning system that tracks officer behavior patterns. When an officer receives multiple complaints, even if they're not sustained, the system flags them for additional supervision and training. This system would have caught Rodriguez's pattern years earlier. Instead of allowing him to accumulate 6 complaints with no consequences, he would have been flagged after the second complaint and subjected to closer scrutiny. As Angela continued her presentation, she noticed Officer Lisa Martinez in the audience. Lisa had been one of Rodriguez's colleagues and had initially defended his actions. But after going through the new training program, she had become one of the most vocal advocates for reform within the department. Chief Williams, Lisa had told her just last week, I never realized how my own assumptions were affecting how I treated people. The training opened my eyes to things I was doing without even knowing it. That kind of transformation gave Angela hope that the changes would stick. The results speak for themselves, Angela continued. Complaints alleging racial bias have dropped by 60% since we implemented these reforms. Use of force incidents are down 40%. And for the first time in 5 years, community trust in police, as measured by independent surveys, is increasing. But the real test had come 3 months earlier, when another incident could have torn apart all the progress. they had made. Officer James Wilson had pulled over a car in the Riverside Heights area, the same neighborhood where Angela had been confronted by Rodriguez. The driver was a young black man named Kevin Thompson, and Wilson had demanded to know what he was doing in the neighborhood. But this time, things went differently. Thompson had immediately begun recording the interaction on his phone and asked Wilson why he had been stopped. Instead of escalating the situation, Wilson had paused, realized he didn't have a valid reason for the stop, and apologized. "I made a mistake," Wilson had told Thompson. "You haven't done anything wrong, and I shouldn't have pulled you over. I'm sorry for wasting your time." Thompson had been so surprised by the officer's honesty and professionalism that he posted the video online with praise for how Wilson had handled the situation. It had gone viral for all the right reasons. "That interaction shows that our training is working," Angela told the city council. Officer Wilson caught himself making an assumption based on race and neighborhood, and he corrected his behavior immediately. "That's the kind of policing we're trying to develop." The question and answer session that followed was intense but constructive. Councilmember Janet Rodriguez, no relation to Tommy, asked about the cost of the reforms, the new training programs, the Citizen Review Board, and additional oversight mechanisms cost approximately $2.3 million in the first year. Angela replied, "But we've also saved money by reducing overtime costs related to excessive force investigations, legal settlements, and officer misconduct cases. More importantly, the reforms had begun to change the culture within the department. Officers were now more likely to report misconduct by their colleagues, knowing that there would be real consequences for bad behavior." Community leader Robert Hayes asked about officer morale. "Change is never easy," Angela admitted. "Some officers have struggled with the new expectations and accountability measures. We've lost 17 officers who chose to resign rather than adapt to the new standards. But we've also recruited 23 new officers who are excited about community policing and building positive relationships with residents." The new recruits went through an enhanced training program that emphasized de-escalation, cultural sensitivity, and constitutional policing. The department was smaller now, but Angela believed it was more professional and effective. As the meeting concluded, Angela reflected on how much had changed since that evening on Maple Avenue. Tommy Rodriguez was working as a security guard now. Having pleaded guilty to civil rights violations and received probation, he had been required to complete community service and attend racial bias counseling as part of his plea agreement. Surprisingly, Rodriguez had reached out to Angela a few months after his termination. He had asked to meet with her, not to ask for his job back, but to apologize and to share what he had learned about his own prejudices. "Chief, I know I can't undo what I did," he had told her, "but I want you to know that I understand now how wrong I was. The counseling helped me see things I never wanted to admit about myself." Angela had appreciated his willingness to take responsibility, even though it couldn't change what had happened. Now, as she gathered her presentation materials, Mrs. Jefferson approached her. "Chief, I have to say, I'm impressed with what you've accomplished," the retired teacher said. "6 months ago, I wasn't sure if anything would really change. But my grandson, Kevin, he's the one who had that encounter with Officer Wilson. He told me it was like dealing with a completely different police force." "We still have a long way to go," Angela replied. "But I think we've proven that real change is possible when there's a commitment from leadership and accountability from the community." David Park, the young man who had been mistreated by Rodriguez, joined the conversation. "Chief, I want to thank you for taking this seriously," he said. "When I filed my complaint 2 years ago, nothing happened. I felt like the system was designed to protect officers no matter what they did. But now I feel like my voice actually matters." That evening, Angela sat in her office reviewing the crime statistics for the past 6 months. Despite fears that increased oversight and accountability would make officers less proactive, crime rates had actually decreased in most categories. Community cooperation with police investigations had increased significantly, leading to higher clearance rates for serious crimes. The phone rang. It was the mayor. "Angela, I watched your presentation today. Outstanding work. The city council is unanimous in their support for continuing the reform program." "Thank you, Mayor, but the real test will be sustaining these changes over time. Reform isn't a destination, it's a process that requires constant attention and commitment." "I agree." That's why I'm announcing tomorrow that the city is making the police reform initiative permanent, with dedicated funding for the next 5 years. After hanging up, Angela walked to her window and looked out at the city she had sworn to serve and protect. The lights twinkled in neighborhoods across the metropolitan area, rich and poor, diverse and homogeneous, all deserving of fair and professional policing. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her daughter. "Saw your presentation on the news. Proud of you, Mom. You turned something terrible into something that's making the world a little bit better." That, Angela thought, was exactly what leadership was supposed to do. Take the worst moments and find ways to create something positive from them. The incident with Rodriguez had been one of the most difficult experiences of her career, but it had also provided the catalyst for changes that would benefit the community for years to come. Officers were now held to higher standards. Citizens had real recourse when their rights were violated, and the department was building the kind of trust with the community that made everyone safer. It hadn't been easy, and the work wasn't finished. But as Angela turned off the lights in her office and headed home, she felt something she hadn't felt in years as a police chief. Genuine optimism about the future of policing in her city. Change was possible. Justice was achievable, and sometimes the worst moments in life could lead to the most meaningful progress. The woman who had been spat at on a sidewalk 6 months ago had transformed her experience into a blueprint for police reform that other departments across the country were now studying and adopting. It was, Angela reflected, exactly the kind of service and protection that every citizen deserved from their police force.